Now, let's bring in the specific geography that makes yesterday's earthquake significant beyond just the fault mechanics. The epicenters of these recent quakes sat less than 100 miles north of Seney Research Station in the South Orkney Islands. The South Orkneys are made up of Coronation Island, Seney Island, Powell Island, and Laurie Island, sitting in one of the most remote and hostile ocean environments on Earth. There are no civilian residents, but the islands are staffed by British and Argentine scientists studying everything from atmospheric conditions to marine biology, people conducting research in an environment that just experienced a shallow magnitude 6.2 nearby, and that sits 42 miles from where a magnitude 7.8 struck in 2013. To the east lies the South Sandwich Island system. The Scotia Plate borders the Sandwich Plate along its eastern edge, and following the South Scotia Ridge boundary eastward eventually leads into the intensely active Tectonic system surrounding the South Sandwich Islands and the South Sandwich Trench. That eastern end is where South Atlantic oceanic crust bends downward into subduction, where deep earthquakes occur at depths of 100, 150, even 200 kilometers, and where the South Sandwich volcanic arc rises as surface evidence of everything unfolding beneath the seafloor. Taken together, the entire system, from the Antarctic Peninsula in the west to the South Sandwich Trench in the east, forms a crescent of geological activity representing one of the most energy-rich and least monitored tectonic regions on the planet. This is the technical backdrop, against which yesterday's magnitude 5.7 and 6.2 need to be understood, not as isolated, random offshore tremors, but as events on a boundary with a documented history of producing earthquakes approaching magnitude 8, occurring on a segment that hosted a magnitude 7.8 just 13 years earlier, unfolding inside a broader regional stretch of elevated seismic activity across the South American plate system, and exhibiting the exact pure strike-slip motion that defines this fault's most dangerous mode of energy release. That British Antarctic survey line about sideways moving events destabilizing neighboring fault segments in a domino effect isn't speculation. It's grounded in documented post-earthquake behavior on this boundary following previous large events. After the 2003 magnitude 7.6, elevated seismicity persisted in the region for some time. After the 2013 magnitude 7.8, scientists tracked the fault's behavior for months afterward. This ridge doesn't fall silent right after a large event. Stress redistribution continues. Sections that absorb the transferred stress take time to either bleed it off gradually through smaller quakes or quietly build it up toward the next rupture. The 2013 sequence on the South Scotia Ridge actually began with a magnitude 6.1 event roughly 50 kilometers to the west, 2 days before the 7.8 struck. 2 days after that, a magnitude 6.8 hit the same region right before the main rupture. Sit with that sequence, 6.1, then 6.8, then 7.8. Yesterday brought a 5.7, followed less than 8 hours later by a 6.2. The magnitudes differ, but the pattern of escalation isn't outside what this boundary has shown before. That doesn't mean a 7.8 is coming in the next 48 hours. It absolutely does not mean that. But it does mean the South Scotia Ridge is currently in an active phase, and the opening moves of past sequences on this boundary have not been subtle. So what does the science say to watch for next? 3 specific things over the coming days and weeks. First, whether the aftershock sequence starts migrating along the fault boundary, aftershocks spreading east or west along the South Scotia Ridge, rather than clustering tightly around yesterday's epicenters, would suggest stress is redistributing into adjacent fault sections. Exactly the pattern scientists look for when judging whether a sequence is winding down or building toward something bigger. Second, the focal mechanisms of any follow-on earthquakes. If aftershocks continue showing the same strike-slip motion seen in yesterday's main event, that confirms the energy release is staying concentrated on the same fault system, behaving consistently with the established tectonic regime. If focal mechanisms start showing different fault geometries, that could signal a more complicated stress field than a simple two-sided rupture. Third, whether seismic activity starts migrating toward the segments of the South Scotia Ridge that ruptured in 2003 and 2013, the sections responsible for the largest historical events. If activity begins tracking toward them, that raises the question of whether accumulated stress on neighboring locked segments is being pushed closer to failure. None of this amounts to prediction. Earthquake science doesn't work that way. Nobody can tell you a magnitude 7.8 is coming next week on the South Scotia Ridge. What science can tell you is that this boundary has produced magnitude 7.6 and 7.8 events before, that yesterday's earthquakes struck the same boundary, 42 miles from the 2013 epicenter, that the fault motion is pure strike-slip, the same mode behind every prior major event here, that the wider regional context includes several recent major earthquakes across the South American system, and that this specific ridge has a documented history of moderate sequences preceding major ruptures. According to Peru's National Center for Disaster Risk Estimation, the country faces a very high level of seismic risk, particularly around Lima. Seismologist Cesar Jimenez Tintaya has noted that only about 20% of the energy accumulated in Peru's central region since the 1746 megathrust earthquake has been released so far, suggesting a future quake in the magnitude 8.5 to 8.8 range is possible there. The broader South American seismic picture is not calm. This is not a quiet stretch for the region. And the southern boundary of the system, the South Scotia Ridge, just shook on the very section of fault responsible for some of the largest strike-slip earthquakes on record for that part of the world. There's a growing public sense that earthquakes are happening more often, and part of that comes down to better seismic monitoring and faster information delivery. People now get magnitude, location, and aftershock data almost instantly. That's true, and it matters. Better monitoring means more quakes get reported, which can create a false impression of rising frequency. But the physical record in 2026 genuinely stands out on its own. Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, and now the South Scotia Ridge, all within a matter of weeks. What makes the South Scotia Ridge uniquely significant in all of this is its role as the literal geological bridge between South America and Antarctica. It isn't just geographically positioned between the two landmasses. It's structurally tied to both, connected at its western end near the Drake Passage, where the fault system links up with the transform boundaries near Tierra del Fuego, and at its eastern end, where it feeds into the South Sandwich subduction system. Any major rupture on the South Scotia Ridge doesn't happen in isolation. It happens at the junction of two of Earth's largest plates, tied to a subduction zone on one side, and to the southern terminus of the South American plate system on the other. The largest earthquake ever recorded in the South Atlantic region was a shallow magnitude 8.1 in 1929, located roughly 450 kilometers northwest of the epicenter of the August 2021 magnitude 8.1 quake along the northern boundary of these two plates. This region has produced magnitude 8 earthquakes before. The 2021 South Sandwich sequence included an 8.1, and the historical record stretching back to 1929 confirms it. This is a zone capable of some of the largest earthquakes on Earth. It's remote, it's cold, and almost nobody's watching it. But the instruments are, and right now they're telling a story that deserves far more attention than it's getting. What happened yesterday needs to be understood in layers. On the surface, a magnitude 6.2 struck a remote patch of ocean near Antarctica. No damage, no casualties, no tsunami. Easy to shrug off. Go one layer deeper, and you find a fault that's produced 2 earthquakes approaching magnitude 8 within the last 23 years. Go one layer deeper, and yesterday's quake struck just 42 miles from where the 2013 magnitude 7.8 originated. Go one layer deeper, and the same fault motion, pure horizontal sliding, produced both yesterday's event and every major prior earthquake on this boundary. Go one layer deeper, and this is unfolding in the same 2-month stretch that's already seen Venezuela, Colombia, and Peru produce major destructive earthquakes across the broader South American plate system. Go one layer deeper still, and the South Scotia Ridge has a documented history of escalating sequences. This is a real plate boundary with a genuinely violent history, showing genuine activity right now. The science doesn't support panic. It doesn't support dismissing this either. What it supports is watching this specific place very closely over the coming days and weeks, because the South Scotia Ridge has proven more than once that it's capable of delivering surprises on a scale that makes a magnitude 6.2 look like nothing more than the opening act. Whether this boundary is dangerous isn't really the question anymore. History already answered that. The real question is whether what we saw yesterday was the end of something or the start of it.